What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. My guest today has a master's in science and a bachelor's of arts, so she could have done many things with her life. Her passion while in college was print journalism. However, the writing on the wall at that time, no pun intended, told her that her future lay elsewhere. So, what does she do? She moves to the nation's capital to begin a career in public health. Now, there's a whole lot more to that story, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But to wind things up, her education and experience led her to her current role as a leading expert in workplace wellness, a certified health coach, and the host of the Full Plate podcast. I am so glad that she was able to take time from her crazy schedule to have this conversation with me, and I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So please welcome Erica Ballard. Erica, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you on here today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so pumped to be here. Like I said, I mean, your beard is amazing. You're so
well,
kind. Like this, I'm excited about today.
Good. So now you were telling me a little bit before we started recording. You were reading some rather interesting books this morning.
Yeah, I woke up this morning and there's all these things I could have done or I had on my list, and I was like, screw it, I just want to read. So I'm reading Jim Kwik's Limitless, which is amazing because it teaches you how to learn, how to retain information more quickly, all of that good stuff. I'm reading Food Fix. It sounds more impressive than what it is. I'm reading like a chapter in each. Food Fix by Mark Hyman, which is all about how our food system is a huge culprit on why health looks the way it looks. And I'm reading this really interesting book called I Will Teach You How to Get Rich. And it makes me sound a bit of a savage, but one, we all like money. And two, it's so nuanced about like credit card companies and switching banks and things that can feel very overwhelming. Just like I'm constantly in awe of the correlation between health and wealth. And so every single time I read a book on wealth, I'm like, oh man, it's like the things we were taught weren't necessarily the things that are true. And people who are rich have a different understanding than people who are not. And this guy breaks it down in such a beautiful way. So and then the last book I read was Me and White Supremacy. So this is
really wow. That's quite a broad range of books there.
I tell you what, my mind was all over the place. For the record, it was not about me being a white supremacist. It was a book on how do you become a better ally. So that was my morning.
I gotcha. Wow, man! And I thought I was busy this morning. You were just cranking out all kinds of stuff. You know, it's really, really interesting. You were talking about how how so many things are connected. Like people that are wealthy tend to be healthy, and they tend to go about things different ways. I follow people like Tony Robbins and Tim Ferriss, and Tim Ferriss is the epitome of a biohacker. There's absolutely nothing this guy can't do, and he's so healthy, and I don't think he's one of the richest people in the world, but he's not doing bad. But when you draw the correlations between the two, it's pretty amazing, for sure. So now let me start things off by having you just kind of get into your background a little bit. What was it like to be Erica growing up, and how did you wind up getting in the health and wellness and fitness space?
Sure. I think most people who get here, we didn't have, we weren't perfect at being healthy. And so so growing up, I'm a military brat. So I have traveled and lived in many different places, and it was awesome. I lived everywhere from St. Louis, Missouri to Stuttgart, Germany, and was able to see the world, and probably why I like all this diversity of books, and probably part of why I'm obsessed with learning is I spent most of my life moving from place to place, interacting, learning. I've always been a reader. I've always been a learner. My dad literally made us in between. I tell people this story, but in between school sessions, I would have to write book reports and do work and do all those things before I was allowed to play, which sounds really bad, but it was actually the most amazing thing ever because I've been taught efficiency my whole life, right? Okay, if you want to play, you got to get this done in the shortest amount of time. So how do you do it? And I ended up in Indianapolis, which is where I went to high school and ended up going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in college, I wanted to be a journalism major, or rather, I was a
Oh,
journalism major and I wanted to be a journalist. Of course, this was 2008, so the economy was crashing
oh
and
yeah.
papers were
Mhm.
it's somewhat similar to right now,
Right.
but the economy was crashing and papers were dying. I wanted to be a print journalist. And so I
Yeah.
knew that that would not be possible for me. And so I took off to
Hmm.
Washington, D.C. and started my career in health. I ended up in HIV/AIDS to start with and
Wow.
bounced around into like really boring stuff, but important stuff like oxygen masks and
Hmm.
yes, and active gaming and writing grants and research assistants and all this stuff. And
Right.
essentially I took like the quick and dirty of it, since I've been going on for a bit, is I went and got my public health master's and or MS in health communication. And while I was there,
Hmm.
my whole view of what health changed because I thought about it being really medically aligned. And then what happened is I moved into a more public health type of mindset. And
Hmm.
when I did that, I ended up getting my quote unquote dream job in
Right.
public health. That wasn't really a dream job because I had to learn a lot of dirty things about health, like how pharmaceuticals play into it, how this money moves, how these different organizations take part in it. And at the
Hmm.
time, I thought to myself, and maybe you did too, like, yep, this is just how health is. So the guidelines are real, and the only reason we're taking money from these groups is because they're so good and they have the best interest in mind. And yet I would drink a lot because I didn't want to
Hmm.
own the truth of what it was. And I was always
Right.
15 pounds like overweight, even though I followed the food guidelines and I did what was asked of me and what I sold to people. And then I essentially found a better way. And once that happened, I could no longer do my day job. I could not push public health messages. I could not push
Right.
cardiovascular disease, traditional
Hmm.
prevention. And it hits that point where you just can't do it anymore. And when I couldn't
Hmm.
do it anymore, I left. And I've been having this career for 3 years plus of helping people one-on-one with their health, figuring out how to stop yo-yo dieting, and then also doing online programs, speeches, and all that good stuff. That was a
Right.
long-winded answer, but you went back, and I was like, "Oh, you want to know about my childhood?"
Well,
I mean,
I have found in through my studies and
yeah.
in developing who I am as far as a holistic nutritionist and whatnot, that so many things that happen during one's childhood shape our adulthood. I mean, there's actually a test that is done in the mental health field. It's called the ACEs test, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
adverse. Yeah, I mean, you may be familiar with it. Adverse child experiences.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that, like, for example, a lot of people that suffer from obesity, if they take that test, they usually score 4 or higher because everything is connected. Our childhood is connected to our adulthood. Our mindset and all that stuff is connected to our body and nutrition and all these things. So much of this stuff is interwoven that as any kind of health professional, you need to take a holistic approach. You need to look at the whole picture and figure out what's going on.
Oh my gosh, I love that you said that. It took me back to this TED talk I watched a few years ago. The 70% of people have trauma regardless of the
Hmm.
socioeconomic background.
Yes.
And that is part of why we're seeing the prevalence of obesity that we're seeing. And this is such
Hmm.
a huge public health crisis that we're not talking about. But to
Yeah.
your point, working in the holistic field is, man, it is almost never about the food.
No.
Like
No.
it's almost never about
No.
the food.
If anything, it's people don't understand what macronutrients and micronutrients do in the body. That's what it has to do with food. But at the end of the day, most people, it's so much more, so much more.
Mm. Oh my gosh.
It's funny. I was watching. Are you familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk?
Oh, Gary Vee, yes. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
I was just before we came on, I was watching his Tea with Gary Vee this morning, and I got into like a conversation in the comments, and this guy was talking about the coronavirus and how it was so bad and all these different things. Now, I'm not one of these people that bashes the way things have been handled. The coronavirus is real, and there are a lot of health concerns around it. It can kill people that are immunocompromised and things like that. But what I think I heard the latest death toll was like 40 or 50,000 or something like that. I look at it, 2.8 million people died last year from causations of obesity alone. And that includes heart disease, diabetes, all these other things. Where is all the focus on that pandemic? You know what I mean? Versus this whole corona thing.
Listen, brother, I think that often, and I say something so unpopular, which is we were always dying. Like we have always been dying. And so this coronavirus is a spotlight on what is wrong, not only with the medical system, but also with the way that we view health. But very few people want to have that conversation. And it's like, we are dying from things that are preventable. And that to me is the most distressing thing, because yes, corona is not necessarily preventable. I understand that it is a virus and all those things, but it's like so much of this other stuff. Like if we didn't have diabetes, if we didn't have a heart disease, if our immune system wasn't compromised because of these different ailments, we wouldn't be seeing the rates at which we're seeing. Like I know people who have COVID, and the healthiest people that I know who have gotten COVID, they rebound so fast. It's just a completely different experience, and it's not to belittle the experience people are having with COVID who have it, but it is really unfortunate that this pandemic is happening and having so many people be sick. And my biggest hope is that we leave this pandemic having a different conversation about health.
Yeah. And overall, and I think a lot of the changes that are happening, maybe not so much the running around with masks and social distancing and stuff like that, but a lot of the changes that are happening throughout all this, I think they're going to be lasting changes. I mean, like you've got a lot of gyms and health companies and whatnot that have actually transitioned, and they're doing a lot of their, training and courses and things like that online versus, having people come into the gym and intermingling and sweating and all that other stuff. I think that the prevalence that we've seen grow out of this is going to stick around for a while. I mean, it's even so bad that like if you want to go buy a webcam, you can't. You can't go anywhere and find them. I went to Office Depot yesterday. I was looking for some dry erase markers. Okay, I walked in, and normally the very first thing you see when you go in there is like all their computers and laptops and everything. Everything is gone. There's nothing there. It's insane.
I know. I was so upset because when I realized what camera I needed to buy, Amazon was gone. Also, gym equipment's gone. I tried to get a pull-up bar because my goal is to do 10 pull-ups. I'm at 6. I'm at 6, or it was before the virus. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this here. I can't. I couldn't get a pull-up bar. But to your point, I think these things are moving online, and I've enjoyed working out at home, having kettlebells, finding different ways to do it. My trainer has always been online. Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting moving into this new normal, because while I love the gym, I love a squat rack, I really do like lifting heavy things. There is something about being able to do it in the comfort of your own home and learning the exercises that truly move your body in a way that can get you results outside of all of these other equipment. So I think it's a fascinating look on what our body is capable of, but also what our mind is capable of, because these switches, like you said, a lot of them are sticking around.
Yeah. Yep. I don't see, I was actually talking to the manager of the gym that I go to. I was driving by there the other day, and I saw the doors were open, and he was in there doing some cleaning and moving some equipment around and whatnot. And we were talking, and he's like, he says, even when we get the green light to open back up, it's not going to be like it used to be. They're corporate, so he's like, the mandates have come down. We have to count how many people are in the gym at a time. We have to take out every other piece of cardio equipment. There are all kinds of situations that are forming out of this that are planned for even after it's all said and done. So I think it's going to be really interesting in the months and even years to come to see how health and fitness expands. And for people like you and I that work with people, both online and in person with nutrition and things of that nature, it's going to open up a whole new world for us too.
I agree. And I am taking this time to say, how can I serve in a better way? And
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that there's a lot of people suffering, and make no mistake, like I make my part of my living through public speaking. So as you can imagine, my income has
That's not
been a
happening.
hit.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
I find that I have had to get more creative about how
Mm-hmm.
to serve, and I've loved it. I've also had to get really clear on how I want to serve. And as horrible as the pandemic is, I have had moments of peace and stillness that I know I just couldn't have gotten if it was a regular day to day. And sometimes you're
Right.
forced to be still.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are, I feel like you're supposed to adhere the call. And so I spent the first 4 weeks going inward, because that's health too, right? When we look at everything going around, I know what to put in my body, I know how to move it. But most of my work when it comes to health is literally the internal game. And
Yeah.
so being able to have that space
Mm-hmm.
was so wonderful, and it allowed for the pivot to happen. And I hope that other people are taking advantage, recognizing that I am privileged in the way that I have experienced this. But for those
Mm-hmm.
who are similar, you know, this was space for you.
Yeah.
And I hope
Yeah.
that people took it for what it was and
Mm-hmm.
continue to, because even though things are opening up, depending on the state you're in, it's like you said, it's going to be different.
Yeah, the term the new normal is going to be a really big thing in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. I mean, but you're spot on, and what you said is really powerful, and people really need to get that. I experienced that last year myself. Last year I had knee issues with both of my knees. The
Yeah.
left knee I had to have a bunch of torn cartilage replaced. My hamstrings had actually gotten so tight from all my weightlifting that it was pulling my patella backwards, and it shredded some of my cartilage. So I had to have that fixed. And while I was rehabbing that leg, an old injury from back in the 80s had flared up. Yes, I'm dating myself. I'm in my 50s. But it flared up, and I never realized that so much arthritis had built up in that knee that I actually, by the time I was done with the rehab on the left leg, I had no cartilage left, and I was bone on bone in the right leg, in the knee. So I wound up in December, I had to have a full knee replacement. But backing up, the whole downtime that I had, because I couldn't work, I had a factory job where it was 12 hours a day plus walking back and forth. I took that and I focused everything I created, T2 Nutrition, my business. Got all my certifications. I've been helping people for years just based off the fact that I lost 150 pounds and reversed type 2 diabetes. But it was taking that time that you had and making something of it. And that's, and you just touched on that, and that was really powerful. So I wanted to reiterate that. So now let me ask you, you started your company, and your company is based on teaching people how to optimize their health and their energy with food. I want you to just kind of expand a little bit on that and let people know your philosophy as far as, that whole concept.
Sure. So when I look at what health is and why we want to get healthy, a lot of us, we initially say something along the lines of, I just want to lose 50 pounds, or I want to lose, which is no easy feat, but I want to
No.
lose 10 pounds, or they're looking at it in the mind of, or within the frame of weight loss. And I believe that you want to get healthy because you want to have more energy for your kids. You want to have more energy to travel whenever that happens again for us, right? You want to get healthy because you want to have better sex with your partner. You want to get healthy because you want to have the energy and mental focus and stamina to get after your side hustle or your main hustle. And so I believe that that's why we want to get healthy. And when I look back on why food matters so much for this, and why food and health, but particularly food matters, is I
Mm-hmm.
look often at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that triangle with
Right.
five different levels. And at the bottom is psychological, and at the top is self-actualization or fulfillment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Self-fulfillment. And in
Right.
psychological is food. And so what that tells me is that if we don't optimize food, if we don't get our food right, we will never actually reach our full potential.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I believe I'm here to help people realize their purpose in and enable them to take the next steps in order to go actualize it. And so with food, it's just such a natural fit because you cannot optimize yourself. You cannot optimize your performance. You cannot optimize your energy unless you get your food right. Maslow's proven it, right, decades ago. And when you also look at the new information about the brain-gut connection, we know that if your gut is wrong, your brain is going to be wrong. So you can't have the energy and the mental fortitude, any of that stuff, in order to move forward in the way that you want to, because I'm huge on health being your unique definition. But it doesn't matter what your definition is, though, right? If you don't get your gut right, your brain will not be right, because this body has been around for thousands of years. And so that's how I view it. I'm so passionate about food, not because I care so much about the micro and macronutrients, which are super important, but because without it, you literally cannot be your best version of yourself. And if anyone listening is ever like, well, I do so much, even though my food is shit. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I'm multitask.
Hey, you can say, all right, let me make this easy for you, Erica. You can say whatever the fuck you want. I don't care. Okay?
It's like, thank you. So it's like people eat like shit and they're like, well, but I do fine. And I'm like, you do fine, but you're in second gear. What if you got to fifth? Like, imagine how, I just told you I read 4 books this morning, and like, that is a lot. That takes a lot of mental energy. That takes a lot of stamina. It takes a lot of focus. And I'm able to do it because I prioritize my health so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, people do not understand just how powerful the connection between the mind and body is. And like you just touched on here a minute ago, you know, we're finding now with all the research of the gut microbiome and how, you know, they pretty much call it the second brain of the body. You know, if you're eating, if you're shoveling in McDonald's cheeseburgers and stuff like that, not that McDonald's is worse than any other one, but that was just what came to my head. You know, you have to look at the breakdown of what the nutrients are. And most people, I mean, at least in my experience, when I start getting my clients to actually start to read labels and read ingredients and what's in individual stuff, it blows their mind. It absolutely blows their mind.
I mean, you can't even say half the words that are in these foods. And you should be able to. If you can't say the word, 9 times out of 10, you should not eat it.
That's my number one rule.
I mean, it's such a simple concept, but so many of us are like, nah. And I'm like, wait, what's that? Like, you look at, I drink protein powder, don't get me wrong. I eat Quest bars, but like, I also know that those things are not real food. Those fall into my 15%. And that's not a knock on them, but I think a lot, and someone said this recently, and I think it's going to be true. I wonder if you do, is that we've had the debate on carbs, we've had the debate on fat, and now having the debate on protein is the next piece of what's real, what's not. And what
it's already started. It's really, the debate on protein is really prevalent in the ketogenic and carnivore communities. It's huge because, you know, for so long people, you know, you have one school of thought with the ketogenic diet that says, you know, your fat is your lever. That's what you adjust in order to lose weight. Your protein is the goal and your carbs are the limit. So there are those that say you have to, if you should be eating 200 grams of carb or 200 grams of protein a day, you have to make sure you hit that 200 grams. If you don't hit your fat goal, if you don't hit your carb goal, that's great. Make sure you get your protein. Then you have others that say, well, no, because, you know, they look at gluconeogenesis and they say, well, if you eat too much protein, then you have to worry about glucose being created in the body, and then you get kicked out of ketosis, which is absolute horseshit, because gluconeogenesis is a demand-driven process, and it only happens when the organs that are in your body that absolutely have to have glucose need it. You know, there is so much misinformation out there, and everybody jumps on the dogma wagon and they talk about this and they talk about that, and it is so much horse shit. So much.
I just love when someone who looks like you just bust out a rant on nutrition and science. Like, listen. But that's the thing. That's what I find so interesting when it does come to protein, is this crazy debate on, and it goes to actually anything, whether it's carbs or fat or protein. like, oh, all the nuances. And I'm like, listen, motherfuckers, you just need to eat real food. You're trying to get into the minutia before you even get the foundations right. And
Right.
I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, I remember when I started my process of getting truly healthy, I wasn't worried so much about all of the numbers. I just knew I needed vegetables. Like, I just needed to start eating vegetables. And the more I took those
Right.
steps, the more I was able to get into the nuances. But I find a lot of times people try to get into the nuances before actually getting the bigger fundamental pieces in place. And that is why they have such a difficult time
Right.
getting to the end, because they're getting so nuanced at the start that it actually is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like I was talking about with the wealth component of it, right? Reading this book is breaking down very clearly how you go step by step, and it's using like lay language, and here are the foundational pieces. And the same thing is with health. Like, we don't have to get so nuanced at the start. You know, you're not eating enough vegetables. You know, you're eating poor quality fat. Do that. And then, unless like you need a medical intervention, unless keto is something that your doctor calls, like, there's obviously some exceptions, but for the vast majority of people, there is like, just start eating vegetables, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will say that there are a lot more doctors that are starting to talk about the ketogenic diet. So many of them are still wrapped up in the research that was done by Dr. Ansel Keys and the whole thing that saturated fat is horrible for you, and you know the whole deal. And it was a big pile of steaming horse shit, and but the entire world bought into it for years, and before all that stuff happened, if you go back and you look at history, back before we started taking saturated fat out of the diet, there was no such thing as celiac disease. There was no such thing as all these other things that are related to, people have problems digesting grains and stuff like that. The reason we developed those things is because we were focusing on that and not eating the fat, which our body actually uses. It makes no sense to me. It makes no sense, and I get fired up. You're right. I get fired up, and I can already tell by talking to you that you probably do the same thing.
It makes me so mad, because I used to sell this stuff. So for the record, I understand why people buy into it, because I did. For most of my life, I literally bought into the low-cal, low-fat movement, because that has what has been sold to us. So I understand the marketing. I understand what it feels like, but I just always ask people to think about this. Like, if you've tried the same thing over and over and over again and it doesn't work, maybe you're not the problem. Maybe it's the methodology. Because if a drug came out and failed 93% of the time, which is what low carb, low fat, low cal does, you would never take that drug. Or if you did experiment with the drug, you'd never think that you'd be the 7%. You'd be like, oh, that is so stupid. But when we do this methodology with Ansel Keys and the low fat movement and all this, you get a terrible result, and then you blame yourself, versus saying, hey, the methodology was effed up. Like, hey, there was institutionalized medicine that was playing a huge role. Hey, big pharma played a massive role in this. Hey, the food industry got behind it and said, I can profit off of this. And we just somehow, because of marketing, have taken away our own ownership and we've given them our power on what's possible.
Yes.
And it just really frustrates me, because I do think so highly of people. Like, I really know that this body of ours is capable of so much. And if you are willing to take your power back, do a little bit of research, you can see what is possible. And that is what drives me so nuts about nutrition science is, one, fundamentally, most of it's flawed. Like, I went to Tufts Medical. I know what research looks like. I understand how to, like, p-values and all that stuff. And it is hard and it's complicated. But if you read the results section instead of the discussion section, and if you read like the method section instead of just the conclusion, you will see that some of the results that come out make no sense. And you'll also see who funds these things. And it's just, it pains me, because people want to feel good. And if they're willing to admit that there could potentially be a different way, then we'd be able to find a different path forward. But people are like, nope, this is the way, I heard it. And I'm like, but if it has failed you 6, 7, 8, 9, 61 times, then maybe the methodology is flawed, and you're okay as a human, and you just need a new way forward. And it really it really bugs me. And I went to this keto conference, which I think is so fascinating. I'm not huge necessarily on people doing keto, but what I am huge on is science. And to see the medical community start to move in that way does make me hopeful, but it's also really interesting to see how long some of the science is taking to catch up. Like you said, I reversed my diabetes. People in the medical community don't say that. They're like, oh, you can't. I'm like, I have seen it with my own two eyes, and it looks a lot different than counting calories, and it looks a lot different than putting a whole bunch of extra insulin in your system, because when you do the mathematical formula of what that does, it literally makes no sense. But we continue to push it because it has been around forever. And if there's ever a reason to do something, it's never because we've always done it that way. Ever.
Yeah. And, I want to go back before I forget. You were talking about people diving into the nuts and bolts of things when they first get started. There are some people that have to do that. I was one of those people. I was a mechanic for 20 years, so I've got to know how shit works. That's just me. It's just how I am. So when everything came crashing down on me and I went to see a doctor that was a fucking idiot and he didn't give me anything to go off of other than a prescription, I started digging in. Whatever I could find on the internet in 2007, I was reading that. I was at the library, you name it, trying to learn everything that I could about how protein, fat, and carbohydrates worked in the body. And once I realized, okay, well, I'm a type 2 diabetic, which means I have a problem processing glucose. Glucose comes from carbohydrates. So obviously a lower carb or even a zero carb approach is going to be good for me. I have a client right now that I had a consult with last night. He's been trying to get fat adapted on keto for about a month, but he keeps fucking up. It's like, he knows what he's doing wrong. It's here, it's all right here. He's like, he'll be midway through a stressful day and he's like, yeah, fuck it. Arby's is across the street. That's where I'm going, And rather than going over there and just getting the meat and the cheese in a bowl and still staying keto, oh no, he gets the Arby's big roast beef and does all that stuff. And that leads to kind of what I want to ask you next, because I'm sure you're a big proponent of this as well. Talk a little bit about how important mindset is in this whole aspect of, controlling your health through nutrition.
Like I said at the beginning, it's never really about food. I mean, yes, to your point, we do need to learn some of these nuances. Yes, there are certain ways to set up your plate, and yes, there may be certain interventions that take place, right? But almost what happens, I see all the time, is people start to go forward and then they stall out. And the reason that they stall out isn't because they didn't learn what to do, isn't because they don't know what to do, or that they don't have the tools or the people available, because the internet, health coaches, all of these people are around all the time, right? It's what's happening in between your two ears. Because I find, and I'd be interested if this is what you find often, is we run up against a subconscious block in our brain. Like, if we cannot figure out why we can't move ourselves forward, even though we plan and we do all the things, it's a subconscious block. And your only job is to figure out what that block is. And it's not as difficult as we make it out to be. I'm going to say it can be painful. I'm going to say that tears might be shed, but you can figure it out. And when you actually see the thing that's blocking you, it's so much easier to get past than you think it is. And I just want to remind people of that, because so much of what we do is mindset. I mean, I hear all the time, I know what I should do, I just don't do it. Hey, I just need you here to kick my ass. And I'm like, I don't have 20 pounds to lose for you. I don't have, I can't do it for you. And I'm not going to beat your head with a frying pan. What I want you to do instead is to crack open a notebook, make space to meditate, give yourself some time to actually receive the answer that you need. Because when it comes to doing what you quote unquote know you should do, if you can't, it really has so much to do with the stories that you grew up with, or the stories that were given to you by family or food companies or community or culture. Like, I call it the wall of lies. So this idea that health is hard, the calorie in, calorie out myth, right? I'm all in or I'm all out. These are all stories that have been given to you. That is not who
Right.
you are. You were not born with any of
Mm-hmm.
that information. You've been conditioned to believe it. And until you
Yeah.
start deconstructing this wall,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to run up against blocks because you're human. We did
Yeah.
too. Like we still do, and we still
Yeah.
do. It's just not in
Mm-hmm.
health right now, right? It's in a different area of our life because these are our teachers. And the quicker people realize that, like, oh, I'm just human, I can catch and release the story, or
Yep.
I can catch the story and burn it to the ground, because those are your two options,
Mm-hmm.
then you can move forward in a much better way. So the mindset piece, particularly from a holistic part of it, right? It is so much like, I think back to your person you said who goes to Arby's. It's like, well, at the root of it, there's a story, and it's also, and the story was caused the stress. And
Yeah.
so if we don't address stress in addition to food and mindset, we're in a really difficult place, because you decided to get triggered.
Yeah.
Like, I decided to get triggered, but like we have decided to get triggered, and we just are like, oh, well, he did this, or she did this. And I'm like, just start taking radical responsibility for all of these actions. And life starts, it's harder at first, and then you realize, oh, great, I'm in charge of my world. And when you do that, things are so much simpler. It's just, man, the mindset piece, I wish more people understood just how powerful they are, but also how powerful these stories are if you don't pay attention to them.
Exactly. And it's becoming a lot more prevalent with, I mean, you're seeing things like, a lot of talk about mindfulness and meditation. And I don't know about you, but like binaural beats has the best thing to come along since sex. I love binaural beats. I could sit down. There are times that I sit down. I spend about 20 hours a day in my office, either creating content or editing content or working with people. I'm a volunteer resident coach in this huge group on Facebook that has over 30,000 members. So I'm always doing something, and I always find that when I'm having trouble focusing or whatnot, I literally just turn all the lights off in my office, and the only lights that are there is from my monitors. And I light an incense, and I go to YouTube, and I find some kind of live track that has binaural beats, and turn that on real low. And and next thing I know is 3 hours later, and I've cranked out all this work, and it just seems like it was effortless. People really need to tap into the power of the mind, because you can literally, I mean, I just talked with another guy about this the other day. There was a study that they did where I think it was 45 people it was either a month or 2 months, twice a day, they imagined for 15 minutes at a time that they were flexing their biceps as hard as they could. They were just imagining it. They weren't actually, physically trying to do it. They were just imagining it. And at the end of this study, the people not only gained size in the muscle, but they gained strength as well. So when you think about how that direct correlation between the mind and the muscle and the mind and the body, it's mind blowing is what the hell it is.
Oh my gosh, I love that study, and the study too about like the piano playing, where like people
Yeah.
themselves playing piano in their mind, and were able to play this music just as well as people who are actually physically practicing. This is why this book, Limitless, why I bought it, was one, I love Jim Quick, but it's also because we are so confined by our own box thinking. And even those of us who are really open-minded, right, we still will put ourselves back into a box every single time we're stressed or we're scared, or like we're about to up level, we're like, oh, gotta stay here, gotta move here. And it's like, no, your mind can and should expand. And it's because and we used to think you can't teach new dogs old tricks, but we now know from all the science you can teach old dogs new tricks. Like the neuroplasticity in our brain is it's mind-blowing, like what we're actually capable of, and the tools that we can use to get this going. And this is why I love, when it comes to like food and mindset, is you're actually able to rewrite a lot of your stories. I mean, I had some crazy ass stories. Like, I used to play games where I didn't have an eating disorder, but I would be like, how long can I not eat food, right? And I would see like carbs as evil and all of these things, and I was able to repattern all that to the point where I eat whatever I want whenever I want to. And the difference, of course, is that I don't want the things that people historically say that when they say that phrase, like they want
Right.
the Big Mac and the pizza. I don't want that, but I eat chorizo. Like I eat sweet potatoes. Like I eat really good. I make pizza on Sunday nights with my husband, and it is really good. But it's just our mind has so much capacity to think differently if we allow it the space to do so. And I always think the same thing in health is like same with the brain is the shift happens so much faster than we think it will. But for us, we're like, 3 months, 6 months. I'm like, 6 months, 1 year, whatever, over the course of 90 is a drop in the bucket, people.
Yeah.
And you can do anything for 3 months. You can do anything for 30 days. You know what I mean? That's how I got started meditating. I put myself in a 30-day challenge because I knew I had to challenge myself. And I did 2 to 5 minutes a day. Now I have to literally set an alarm for 30 minutes because I'm like, you can't be in here for 30. Like, you got to go. Like, you got to go. I would stay there all day if given the opportunity because I love it so much. But when I started, oh no, I didn't like it. But now I love it. And my brain craves it.
It's you're exactly right. If you put a lot of times you can just put a framework around something and it will actually, it'll actually help you reach that goal a whole lot quicker. I'm in this situation. I have to have some minor surgery done, and I went and met with the surgeon yesterday, and he's like, "You're not going to believe this," and I'm almost ashamed to tell you this. According to your BMI, which we both know is a crock of shit because it doesn't take into account bone density, water, or muscle mass, and I got a fair amount of muscle mass. So he's like, you have to lose 15 pounds before we can do this surgery in 30 days. And he's like, and I can tell you now because you were saying that you were an Army brat. My wife is military, so we have military insurance. And he said the insurance company will not authorize the surgery unless you lose that 15 pounds. And I'm like, how in the fuck am I going to lose 15 pounds? Not that I can't lose 15 pounds in 30 days, but it's like, I'm relatively healthy. I'm not that bad off. I'm 53. So, there's some weight in places that there shouldn't be. But, come the hell on. But here's the deal. Okay, I've got to lose 15 pounds in 30 days. So what did I do? I'm putting together the infographics and everything now, and I'm going to go online and I'm going to make it a challenge and get a bunch of people to join me, and we're going to lose 15 pounds in 30 days. So I'm going to take this dumb shit that this doctor told me, and I'm gonna do what he asked me to do, but I'm going to turn it into a positive for a bunch of other people too.
I just think that that's such an insane story. So my husband too, he would be overweight for his BMI, and me, I'm on the top end of mine, being 5'5", but I'm like, what in the absolute hell? Like, it doesn't make sense because they're just using numbers to dictate who you are. And that's the thing about health is you are an N of one, like you are unique to you. And so if we don't actually take to account, then we're in a space where someone who doesn't need to lose 15 pounds has to lose 15 pounds. I'm like, I know what insurance you have, and I'm like, are you kidding? But I know the military insurance. I'm like,
yeah.
But I have to correct you really quickly. I'm a Marine brat. I am not an Army brat.
Oh, okay. Did I say Army? I knew you were military. I knew you were a military brat.
No, it's okay.
So you're Marines. Yeah. My wife's a sergeant in the Army. So
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, well, she's in the Guard now. She was active duty for 8 years. And they wanted us to move to Georgia so she could become one of only 4 female drill sergeants. And she didn't want to go. It's like we were at a time in our lives where the kids were getting a little older. They were real situated where they were. And, one was getting ready to graduate. She's like, no, I'll just go into the Guard. So that's what she did. So, but anyway, I don't want to get too far off track with that. Let me ask you, because I know that you kind of specialize in working with busy professionals and how to, teaching them how to live a healthier lifestyle, even though they have such hectic schedules. What are some of the things that you would recommend to not only the busy professionals, but anybody when they're looking at managing their time better in accordance with health and fitness?
That's a really good question. And where I would start with it is figuring out what your definition of health is. And I say that because a lot of us, we think that health is a bunch of habits. So it's working out 5 days a week, it's making our meals, it's doing all these different things. But really what health looks like and what health is to you is usually not a bunch of habits. What it is, it's, I have, like for me, I always say, I want the freedom to be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want to do it. And from a physical standpoint, that means if I want to hike a mountain, I can hike a mountain. It means if I want to get on a plane, whenever that's allowed again, that I'm able to get on a plane, go to Europe, go to wherever, and be able to walk all day doing whatever it is that I want. And so that's my definition, right? And so from there, that's where I start to peel back the actual things of what I need to do and to then set my health goals. Because what I see a lot of times with busy professionals or anyone really is we don't define what health is to us, and then we don't define our goals. And we don't define like goals for like month 1, month 3, month 6, 12, right? We set one big lofty goal, like I want to drop X amount of weight or I want to look this certain way. And then we just try to move forward. And it's like, if you have a job, right? Typically you have markers that you need to meet, like Q1 goals, or you have to produce a certain amount of things by the end of the week or whatever it is. And it's like, you got to use those same metrics for yourself to actually be able to build it and measure whether or not you're going in the right direction, because the scale will not always tell the truth. So even though you're dropping fat, your numbers may not drop on the scale.
Right.
It just is. So having these different pieces are really helpful. So I always say for people, start with 1, defining what health actually means to you. Second thing, actually define your goals, and then you can start chipping away at what you need to do. And the third piece is give yourself grace as you go about it. Like you're not perfect at your job. Like when you started your job, you weren't perfect. You just weren't. You had to give yourself some time to get there. And in health, for some reason, and I mean, there's multiple reasons, but in health, we don't give ourselves that same grace. And I wish people would, because you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. And I never try to be. But something about health, people are like, I must be perfect. And if I'm not, and I know it's a mechanism for failure, but it's really interesting on how you get to that story,
Yeah, exactly. And what you just said is like super friggin' powerful, because it's like there are people, and it doesn't just wrap around health and fitness. It's so many things in life. We are so worried about how we're perceived by others that you can actually wind up getting in your own way. Like, for example, one of the things that I've struggled with as I've started to develop this podcast and my business and things like that is that how do I get people to take someone who's 53 years old, not the conventional nutritionist and trainer, I've got a little extra body fat here or there, but I'm 53 years old, how do I get people to take me seriously? And what I came to realize was it's not about them. It's about me. And I do exactly what you just said. I have a main goal in mind. My goal is by the time I die, if I don't wipe out obesity and type 2 diabetes, I'm going to take a huge chunk out of its ass. That's my goal. That's what I want to do. But I know that there's a lot of little goals that I need to meet along the way. And, always keep the end game in mind, but focus on what you need to do right now. And then once you get past this hurdle, then deal with the next one. Don't take on so much. I agree.
And if I may also celebrate when you do the thing that you say you want to do.
Indeed.
So many of us are like, I'm going to celebrate when. And it's like, no, you have to celebrate along the way, because as it's like a hit to your brain and to your body that's like, oh, this is a good thing. When we hit a goal, this is a good thing. And so it continues the process and enables you to move that way. And I just also love how you so unapologetically like laid out that big goal. And that's the piece that I think people don't do either, is like, what the fuck do you want? Like, really, what do you want? And it's, I like yell at some of my clients in the beginning, and I'm like, why did you pick that number? Why did you pick that thing? Oh, well, it's what I was capable of. I'm like, what do you want? Like, I have someone, she's 5'5" and like 207, and she wants to be 150, or at least like, weight matters as much, but it's the idea of being a size 6, right?
Right.
And she's like, well, I want to be 175. I'm like, no, I just heard you. Now you're saying,
Right.
I want this. And it's like,
Right.
own it. Like if you get
Yeah.
really, really, really clear about what you want to do and you own it, it's amazing what you will start to see, because the path does unfold for you.
Right.
Like it's crazy, right? It unfold. I can't explain it like in any words that would make sense or logical or rational, but
Right.
it happens. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
like, if we can just throw out that big goal, let it be known, and then move systematically, use a bit of order to get us to point A to point B, recognizing that as long as you get to B, the path might look completely different, but you got to B. Celebrate. All right, let's go to C.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's go to D. And I really do wish people would apply the fundamentals that we've learned in our jobs, at school, at different places to health. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I ask people to write their goals and they're like, I have no idea how to do this. And I'm like, but you've done it everywhere else. Like, and if you Google SMART goals, you know, like there are courses on how to do it, but it comes to your health, you're like, I just can't imagine it. And it's like, please do, like, please try. Turn off your lights, put on, meditate, make this, like, let your mind create your future, and then just watch what happens in the real world. It's shocking. It's shocking what can happen when you believe your own thoughts. Like
Indeed.
in the positive.
Indeed.
So,
Yes, indeed. You know, it's like one of my favorite mentors, Tony Robbins, he says, when you're going to set a goal, set the biggest fucking goal you can find. You know, look for the end of the rainbow and set that as your goal. And don't sit and beat yourself up for all the days that you haven't achieved that goal, but every day that you get one step closer, celebrate that victory. And if you do that, you're going to make constant progress. And you may never reach that ultimate goal at the end of the rainbow, but you're going to be a hell of a lot better off than you were on the first step. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And that's exactly what you were just talking about, without a doubt.
It's amazing what 1 or 2 steps forward can do for you. It really is.
Indeed, for sure. Okay, I have one final question to ask you, and it's the same one I ask everybody that comes on my show. If you could affect one thing about health and fitness on a global level, meaning you would institute a policy, put forth an idea, come up with an exercise, whatever it would be, what would it be?
This is such a good question. I knew you were going to ask it, and you thought that somehow I would have been more prepared. If I don't know what the policy would look like, but it would be around marketing food to youth and minorities, putting a kibosh on the amount of money that can be spent, or if any money can be spent, on the marketing to those who are historically disenfranchised and children, because man, they hook us young. And that's why so many of us continue to do it. And if they weren't allowed to put billions of dollars into their marketing to the youth and to parents to make sure that they're drinking formulas and things that are chock full of sugar, we'd have a different world. So I think that that's what it would be.
You know what? I have to tell you, Erica, that's got to be one of the best answers I've had from any time that I've ever asked that question. You know, it all starts young. It really does. There are very, very few people, unless they have some kind of traumatic event, run into situations where they just massively put on weight when they're adults. If they've been relatively healthy throughout their life, in most cases, they're going to stay that way. Where we're failing is our children. You know, as you well know, one of my main focuses is type 2 diabetes. And 25 years ago, there was no such thing as type 2 diabetes. It was called adult onset diabetes, and kids didn't get it. If kids were diabetic, they were born type 1 diabetics. They weren't producing insulin. But because of the fact, and I blame things like the network television and the cereal companies. Saturday morning cartoons ruined the youth, in my opinion, because all they did was, not only did they push all these toys that parents had to go out and spend their money on, but all they did was push all this sugary horse shit, and the kids wanted it. So us as parents, we try to give our kids what they want, and not knowing any better because we were all focusing on fat and shit, we gave them all that sugar. And look at them now. It was some time back, I went to pick my granddaughter up from school because she was going to spend the weekend with my wife and I. And I went there and I'm sitting there waiting for her to come out, and I heard the bell ring, and I see all these kids come pouring out of the school, and 70% of them at least were obese. And I was like, this is a sad fucking picture. It really is, because those obese kids, some kids are fat, and then as they get older, they grow out of it. It's a baby fat or whatever you want to call it. But the majority of them are going to stay that way. And they're in a society where they spend so much time inside. They're not getting vitamin D from the sun. They're sitting on their ass playing video games, shoveling more junk food in their face. And they're growing up with those habits. So when they have kids, they're going to pass those habits on to them. I think we're failing our youth, and because of that, we're failing as a society. So like I say, that's the best answer I've ever gotten from that question, without a doubt. And I thank you for that. Sometimes it's weird. And I don't know why. Sometimes it's like when I interact with people before I do a podcast with them, there are some people that I'll give them a heads up on what that question is. And there's others that I don't. And it's because I want the organic answer. I want that on the spot answer, because a lot of times you get those little hidden gems out of it, which is why I put together that question. And yeah, this was definitely a win, without a doubt. Without a doubt. So now I'm going to put everything in my show notes, but before we wrap this up, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on social media, your website, all that good stuff?
Sure. So I play the most on Instagram, so at Erica Ballard Health. I do a lot actually on LinkedIn as well, because I work with business professionals. And I have a podcast launching next week, so it'll probably be live by the time this interview goes live. It is a 8-part series, so it's not an interview style, but an 8-part series called The Lies We've Been Fed. And it really digs into a lot of what we talked about with the fat and Ansel Keys, and how we have come to the society to believe a lot of these lies about food.
Right. That's all. You'll have to be sure to reach out and let me know when that launches, so I can definitely not only listen to it, because I'm looking forward to it, but I want to share it as well, because just in the little bit of time that we've talked and getting to know you, the message that you have to tell is one that everybody needs to hear. So I want to make sure that I share all that information.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate this time with you today.
Oh, yeah, same here. Sit tight 1 second. I'm going to wrap this up, and then I'll come back with some parting words. Okay, guys. I say this all the time, but without a doubt, I have, if you didn't get value out of this, you weren't paying attention. It's just that simple. So do me a favor, because this is the type of content that I want to be putting out there all the time. Hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell, so that way you get notified when new episodes of the podcast drop. And also, if you're on my channel, right up in the top right-hand corner, there's a little Patreon link up there that I set up to kind of help grease the wheels and keep things moving here. Costs money to keep the internet on these days and things like that. So if you would, do me a favor and hit that Patreon link as well. And until I see you again, you guys know my motto: playtime's over. It's time to go to work.